Hey there, let's make this calculator using Tailwind. Now the cool thing about this calculator is that it's going to be made with Tailwind, 0 custom CSS classes, and we're going to use Tailwind's grid classes to build out these buttons in this grid. And you'll see just how easy Tailwind's grid classes are in this video. So let's start out with a brand new code pen, and I am going to go into the settings for our CSS. I'm going to go down here to add external style sheets / pens. I'm going to type in Tailwind. Now we'll see Tailwind right here. We just click that and it'll bring in the CSS file for Tailwind. Now, if you're using a larger project, you definitely want to use post CSS instead of just using this CSS file because you get all of the benefits of like purging CSS classes and stuff like that. But since we're in CodePen, we're just going to use the CSS. Now, we don't need the CSS or the JavaScript tabs here, so let's shrink those and let's get started. So we'll say div class is equal to min height screen. Let's go for background gray at 700. And I really like doing this for especially these CodePen demos of just getting a background, and then I want to center everything inside of this. So we're going to go flex, item center, which is vertically centering something, and then justify center, which is horizontally centering something. So now we can say div here, calculator goes here, and there we go. Our text is right in the middle of our CodePen. So I liked to start out demos with this line right here where you pretty much center everything, give it a background. Now next up, I really like going through and giving out the HTML comments so that we know where everything is in our demo. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to do an HTML comment with command /, and I'm going to say form goes here, which is the input form for the number. And then I'm going to say buttons, here we go, buttons go here. So let's start with a form. I'm going to do the HTML first, and then we'll style it out. So we're going to have a form. Actually, let's use Emmet here. Form, the HTML shorthand tool, input, type is number, and let's close that out. So I'm going to finish this out. I'm going to press tab, and that will auto-complete all of that. We don't need an action since our form isn't going anywhere. And let's say that's it. And let's do an HTML comment for calculator goes here. Okay, so now that we have the calculator overall there, we have the form there, buttons go here. I'm going to just put a div in here just to placehold it. Let's start by styling out the outside of the calculator. So let's go up here. I'm going to say class, and let's give this a background gray of 800. I want it to pop off of the background, and you can't really see it right now because the form is all that's in the calculator. But we can really see it if we give it a border. So let's go border 2, and that's the size of the border, 2 pixels. But you need to give it a color also so that it doesn't look so weird like that. Border gray, and let's go for 900. So darker than the background and the overall background of our app. Let's go for shadow 2XL, rounded and large. And that way we get a nice, good looking border right there. And let me zoom in, see if we can't get this a little bigger. Drop this font size down so we can get our demo bigger. Okay, so that's good enough for the outside of our calculator. Let's start working on the form. So the form, if we go back to our demo, the form had a border on the bottom here. So I'm going to give that border to the form, not the input, because the input will be right in the middle here. It'll have some padding. So I'm going to go here, class, border, and I want the border on the bottom now. So I'm going to go border bottom 2 and border gray at 900 to match the outside border of our calculator. Now this is where we can really start to see the styles take place. Let's make sure that our background is transparent. Let's go for padding of 8 on that input. Let's go for text 3XL. And now if we start typing into this as numbers, there we go. We see it all right there. So we've done all of our pretty much box sizing attributes as far as padding and background. We have our text sizing in there. I want to add one more for the border, let's drop the outline none. And then on hover, we'll say, or actually on focus, we'll say background gray at maybe that 700. And that way, when you focus into it, the background shows up. But notice that the background on the top left and top right aren't rounded. We need to round those out as well. So I'm going to go up here next to my padding and say rounded top large, just to match the roundedness of our overall calculator. So there we go. We also need the text to be on the right side, so we'll say text right, and text needs to be white so it pops off of this background. There we go. Okay, so that'll do it for our form area. So that's looking good. Let's start moving to the button. This is the bigger part of our calculator. So what I want to do here is I want to style out one of the buttons real quick, and then we are going to talk about how we can go forward and style out our grid. So here, I'm going to give a button right here. I'm going to say button, and let's call this C, because we have a C, and then we have a divide sign next to it. And I'm going to use HTML to create our divide sign and divide. Okay, so that's row number 1 right there. So we have this big C thing and the divide button. And I'm going to go for a couple more. I'm going to go for, actually, let's use Emmet again. So let's create 4 buttons times 4. And then inside of that, I'm going to have a number. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll go to the outside and press tab right there. But this 4 is going to be the and times HTML character. So right there, 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Okay. So let's actually style this out and see how our grid works real quick before we move into styling anything else. So we'll say class. Let's give this a padding of 6 just so that it kind of gets not so bunched up to the edges. There we go. And just while we're here, let's do text white so we can see what's happening. Cool. All right, so padding 6, text white. We can see all of that there. Now let's talk about the grid classes really quick. So Tailwind's grid classes, I thought were going to be really confusing because CSS Grid takes a lot of writing to do, but the Tailwind grid classes are actually amazing, and I'm really, really surprised at how simple they are. So you just go grid to define a grid for display property. Then you say, I want to define my column. So I'm going to go grid columns of 4. So 4 columns across this, and it automatically fills things across 4 columns. Now you can also define a gap of 5. So the gap goes like 1, 2, 3, 4, and that gives you the gap in between these sections right here. So if I right click inspect element right here, and I click this right here, you can actually see the grid show up. You can see the gap show up in the purple right there, and our grid is created. So really, really nice grid tools in Chrome. So I'll close this again. And now the big question is, okay, we've created a grid. How do we get the C button to be the giant thing right there? Well, that's really awesome to do in CSS Grid and in the Tailwind classes. We go here and we just say class on this. We say column span 3. So I want that C to span 3 columns. If I did 2, it would have spanned 2 columns. And what's cool is you can do that for row as well. So row span 2. And that would just create a giant C button, and everything would kind of flow around that. So really, really cool to use these classes to build out these grids that you want. For our calculator, we just need column span 3. All right, so let's give the button section a little bit more styling. Let's go for text XL and text gray instead of that text white. So let's change this out to gray 800. Because we're going to be putting a background on our buttons in a second, and that will look pretty good. So let's go for a background of blue of 500. Let's go for rounded at full and padding of 5. And we have our nice rounded buttons. So let's also give this a background color if we hover it. So let's go for here, hover background blue of 400. There we go. All right, so where did our other stuff go? That's probably because our text is the same color as our background, so it doesn't really show. So I'm going to go down to each one of these. I'm going to hit Command and click through all of these and say class is equal to, and let's go for the same exact setup, background gray at 500. Let's go for a hover, background gray at 400. Let's give it that rounded full and the padding of 5. And I spelled full wrong right there. Okay, so now we have our rounded buttons right there, but the divide symbol and the multiply symbol are going to be purple. So let's do this right here, purple, and down here, purple. And there we go. That gap is also maybe a little big, so let's drop that down to 4. Cool. So now we have that row of buttons. We have the second row of buttons. Another thing we can do is actually change out this font. So let's say font mono so that it gets more of a calculator feel. And for each of these, button class right here, I'll just Command D to select all of these, font mono. And I know this is getting a little cramped in our editor right here. Cool. So now we can take this, copy this whole thing right here. So we need a couple more rows, right? We need this row, and then the final row. So we need 2 more of the 4 columns. So let's go that one and that one. And we'll just change out the numbers real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is 4, 5, 6. Is that right? 4, 5, 6 minus. Okay. So this is going to be minus. And this is 7, 8, 9. Almost there. And this is plus, I believe. And now we can go for our last row. We'll copy that first row right here. Go all the way down. Press enter right there. But it starts with a 0. And I believe this is going to be our equal sign. Okay, so that's looking good, but our 0 shouldn't be spanning that 3 columns. We need that to be on the equal sign. So I'm going to take this column span 3 and move it over to the equal. There we go. Okay, so that is our Tailwind calculator. We've got some hovering on it. We've got a form that actually shows when you're typing into it, thanks to our focus pseudo class. And we have CSS Grid through Tailwind, all to build out this really cool looking calculator. So thanks for watching. I'll drop a couple links to a couple more things. I've got a beginnertailwind.com for a Tailwind starter course. We've got a free Emmet course that I'll link in the description as well. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to see more of these build XYZ with Tailwind, let me know in the comments and we'll definitely do more of these. Thanks for watching.